Hi, thank you. And good morning, everyone. Really delighted to meet you all. Unfortunately, I couldn't join the meeting in person. I'm really missing the days when we sat together and exchanging brainstorming ideas in the previous NIMAC annual meeting. So for those we haven't met yet, I'm Maggie Chao, the Director of Teaching Learning and Evaluation Management Unit at the University of Hong Kong. My unit is actually an institutional member of the NIMAC for more than 5 years. I'm also the current president of the International Positive Psychology Association Education Division. So I'm really glad to talk about the well-being assessment, where my specialties are, and also something that I'm really passionate about. So let me start with a brief quiz in 2 words or even less. What do you most want for your children? So if you are like hundreds of parents who were asked the same question, your response may be like happiness or health or balance, kindness or satisfaction and the like. So in short, you most want well-being for your children. And also this quote is from Martin Seligman, the founder of positive psychology and also the founder of positive education. Martin is also my teacher, where I got trained from University of Pennsylvania on positive psychology. So well-being is average health birthright. It is not an add-on. It is also not something extra, but really a core of a good life. And Seligman and colleagues, they established the field of positive education around the year of 2009, about a decade ago. And they define positive education as education for both traditional skills and for happiness. I like to call it education for flourishing, the combined power of learning and well-being for flourishing. In the past decades, there has been a wide range of approaches coming from different lineage to cultivate student well-being and socio-emotional learning, or beyond academic learning in a broader sense. Let me give you some quick examples here. For example, the term of socio-emotional learning, character education, growth mindset, resilience education, positive youth development, and so on. So just to name a few of the examples here. So each approach has its unique advantage, and they all have something in common. For instance, they all emphasize on the non-cognitive factors, which also some of the previous speakers also mentioned. So examples for non-cognitive factors like well-being, character, social-emotional learning, and also relates to the 21st century skills. So they emphasize that these factors, these non-cognitive factors, are just as important as developing academic skills. And the other thing that they all have in common is that they emphasize on the evidence-based approach, incorporating the scientific approaches or the research findings from the field of psychology and other related fields. Another key feature, or particularly the distinct feature of positive education, is the so-called strengths-based approach, the positive perspective that emphasizes growth, students' growth, develop, and the potential for optimal functioning. Taking Hong Kong as an example, in the beginning of this field around 10 years ago, there was less than 1% of schools listed positive education as their major concern or strategy. But now in 2022, we are really glad to see, and there are more than 60% of primary schools and more than 40% of secondary schools in Hong Kong, they have embraced the idea of positive education or related approaches as I mentioned earlier, as part of their school development strategies. Also, in the interest of time, I'm gonna quickly go through a few assessment examples. First of all, starting from some global and national examples. So one global example is the World Happiness Report from Gallup. It used a global survey data to report how people evaluate their own lives in more than 150 countries worldwide, and they've conducted the survey for 10 years. The second example, I'm sure many of you are very familiar with this OECD's recent survey on socio-emotional learning. As to national level example, UK launched a national well-being program since 2010 to consider well-being as an indicator of national performance beyond the GDP. So in other words, they place equal importance between well-being and economy. Regarding school examples, the first example comes from Australia's Geelong Grammar School. So Geelong Grammar School is among the first to introduce positive education in the whole school approach. And also this is the book they published documenting details about their positive education approach, including the assessment. And the second example actually from us, from IPA and our International Positive Education, Positive Psychology Association Education Division. So our past president, Dr. Maggie Chao and colleagues, they have just published a handbook on positive education, which is free and open access. And there are several chapters have intensive discussions on the issue of well-being assessment in schools. As another example, Professor Angela Duckworth's her character lab developed a tool which they called Student Thriving Index as a formative assessment, assessing students' social, emotional, academic, and physical well-being. So far, I start with the landscape of positive education for flourishing, and followed by some examples of national assessment, also school assessment. In the second part of my talk, I'm gonna share my experience, reflections, and also give 5 recommendations about well-being assessment. The first recommendation is to structure a well-being assessment plan. So assessment plan should be integral to the whole well-being education package rather than as a postdoc approach. And the assessment plan is suggested to include 5 core domains according to this REAIM framework. So target or reach, the first element refers to the sample, the characteristics of the target population, whether this targets to the primary school student or secondary school student or college students. And then the second domain, efficacy or effectiveness, is about how to measure, how to capture the benefit of this well-being, social-emotional learning education programs or intervention. And the third one, adoption, is about capture the extent to which education program, well-being program are adopted by others. For example, considering factors like country, culture, relevant social, economic factors of this intervention needs to be considered. And implementation refers to the extent to which a program is delivered. So document the detailed process or protocol and materials, how the well-being or social-emotional learning programs are delivered. And also the final piece, maintenance, it refers to extent to which the program is sustained over time. This is not just a one-time snapshot of data, but about it is a process. And the second recommendation is to include multiple indicators and also multiple methods of measurement. For example, including both positive and negative indicators to capture student progress of increasing well-being and reducing ill-being. As WHO highlights here, well-being is not just the absence of ill-being. Also, similarly, Martin Seligman said that curing the negatives does not produce the positive. So the recommendation is to include both well-being and ill-being indicators. By the way, this is a drawing from my student, Jane. Actually, Jane used to experience some mental problems, and she recently attended my positive education program, and now she felt happier. So I also hope her drawing could also help to brighten up your day. And then also, as part of the second recommendation, also incorporating multiple methods of measurement to capture the dynamic of the well-being process. So in addition to using commonly used self-report measures, when feasible, maybe also consider alternative assessment, like a behavior assessment, experience sampling method, observations from the parent, the peer, the teachers, and other measures. So according to the research from positive psychology, thriving or flourishing is a process, it's not a destination. So multiple methods of measurement should be considered to capture the dynamic and also the complexity of well-being progress. In addition to quantitative measures, also include qualitative measures and methods. And oftentimes we focus a lot on well-being measurement, but the suggestion is to incorporate both measures for well-being and learning. And also very importantly, to investigate the interplay or interaction between learning and well-being, or between well-being and the student's academic performance. Moving on, the third recommendation is to consider age-appropriate and culturally sensitive measures. For example, when adapting an existing well-being measure developed for adults, whether it is also reliable and valid for children and young people needs to be further examined. In terms of cultural variations, many of the existing well-being measures were developed based on Western cultures and countries. It is insufficient to simply translate a measure without carefully considering the validity and appropriateness of that measure for the specific culture and the specific school setting. This is also particularly important in the well-being assessment topic. And the fourth recommendation is to include multiple perspectives. So to enable a holistic view of the effect of well-being and social-emotional learning programs, it's necessary to extend the assessment of all stakeholders involved, not just students, also consider involving teachers, other school staffs, and school leaders and parents. This is particularly important for well-being assessment. It also echoes the whole school approach, which is used in positive education. And then the final recommendation is to focus on meaningful change and practical significance, rather than just making education decisions based on statistical significance. So what are really the meaningful change reflected from the assessment data, both quantitative and qualitative? That's all of my 5 recommendations. And towards the end of my talk, I'd like to also share our practice by introducing our self-developed program with Thrive. It is a positive education program. It designed to equip university students with a set of intellectual, intrapersonal, and interpersonal capabilities towards students thriving collectively. And the design of the program and also the curriculum of the program are benchmarked against the world's leading positive education programs. In terms of the pedagogy, it uses a strengths-based approach to engage students cognitively, emotionally, and behaviorally. And also we employ a wide range of learning activities like inquiry-based learning, reflective learning, experiential learning, student as partnership, and so on. As you can tell from some of the pictures shown here, so we combine the learning from both synchronized learning and asynchronous learning. We also have our university students to go to local schools to teach what they've learned from With Thrive to the local school students. So in terms of assessment, we've investigated the effectiveness of this With Thrive program in pre-test and post-test control group design, also collecting both quantitative and qualitative data. And the finding suggests that With Thrive was very well received by our students, as some of the sample comments shown here. And the students generally find the program enriching and inspiring. Also, students' level of thriving has been increased as a result of the program, and also the increase sustained after the program completion. So here comes to my conclusion of my talk. First of all, well-being matters for individuals, well-being matters for societies. So both me and we, well-being matters. Secondly, well-being can be measured, can definitely be measured, as evident from the national and the school examples I mentioned earlier in this talk. And also well-being is affected by multiple factors, such as personal, school, community, national factors, which should be taken into account in designing and implementing a well-being assessment. So it's been really fascinating, spend the time together this morning and share a bit of my work and my thoughts on well-being assessment. I look forward to your questions, your insights, and also potential collaborations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maggie, for this very insightful presentation on a topic, and also like highlighting that, of course, I mean, often when we talk in terms of assessment of well-being, we're looking at like large-scale assessments or surveys, but also highlighting what can be done at the school level and how it is integrated within the whole school approach of learning. So we open the floor for questions. I'm looking at both online and in person. There's a question here from Bangkok, from Ursula. Ursula.
Thank you very much. And thanks, Maggie, for this really interesting and wonderful presentation. I really love the idea of positive education, and I think it's really so important. Could you say a little bit more about what the key features are for pedagogy that relates to positive education, and what the assumptions or hypotheses are, how positive education really helps to support well-being in students? And I think this also relates to my second question: how is well-being defined in your research and with relation to positive education? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for the wonderful question. Actually, some of your questions I'm still pondering, and also I'm still conducting research on that, because you know, the field of positive psychology and positive education is still quite young, with like 10 or 20 years of history. And also actually looking at the literature, there are various definitions about positive education, well-being. From my read of the literature, also from my own experience, I tend to consider a positive education not just as a discipline or not just as approach, but more broadly as a perspective, which is the strengths-based perspective rather than the deficit-based perspective. As I mentioned in my presentation, it focuses on growth, focus on development, focus on the potential, the human potential, human flourishing. And also I think this also relates to a question, while there are different similar concepts like positive education, socio-emotional learning, character education, positive youth development. So what's really the similarities or differences there? I respect every approach, which I think they all from different framework, lineage, they all have their own uniqueness and advantages. So from an integrative view, I would consider, like I mentioned in my presentation, they have those three things in common: focus on non-cognitive factors, focus on use an evidence-based approach and also focus on strengths or development. So yeah, I'm trying to recall your question. Part of the question asked about the pedagogy. This is also a wonderful question. I'm also looking for more school examples, like to really sharing their pedagogy. To me, again, I think positive education is a broad perspective. It's a strengths-based approach. I also look forward to more research about pedagogy. For example, what are some of the pedagogies that are particularly effective for this umbrella term of well-being and education? Yeah, sorry, any follow-up thought?
We actually have 2 questions. So I'll read the question on the chat, and then I'll give the floor to Margaret, who has also a question, and then maybe you can answer both at the same time. So the question from Shehad Jiva says, what are the tools that are currently used to assess well-being? If you give us a little bit more details on the assessment tools when we look at well-being. Margaret?
Yeah, thank you very much. This was really an interesting presentation. I'd like to come back to something that I think we all are sort of concerned with right now, and that really is the impact of COVID-19 that has impacted severely the well-being of students. So discussing with countries and teachers from countries, they say very often that they have great difficulties of really identifying precisely, let's say, what the problem is. Let me just call it like that. I mean, they can see that the students have been affected, that they're not well, that it deeply also, of course, impacts their learning. But I mean, they are in a difficult situation. So from your experience, would you be able to point to a methodology to assess, let's say, the state of well-being of students that could be helping teachers to first of all identify what the problem is, and then, of course, come up with possible solutions. This being said, trying to keep it simple, because we're really talking about teachers at all levels, including in rural areas where they do not have a lot of means, and they're not necessarily trained as psychologists. So, have you been also working on that or starting to think about that kind of work, which is something I think countries would need very much right now? Thanks, over.
Thank you. Maggie, the floor is yours for these 2 questions.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thank you for both wonderful questions, which also I think are kind of related. And as I mentioned, this is really a young field. I myself is also looking forward to more assessment tools, really. And so yeah, if any schools or national level that you in the process of developing some tools, I'm really glad to have a conversation with you. And in Hong Kong, we are actually starting to develop some assessment tools, collecting data now in the pilot stage. So I hope I could give an update after later after a few rounds of future data collection. And in terms of the second question on the for example, the methodology, first of all, I really agree that we should keep it simple, start simple, because when talk about the whole well-being assessment plan, this can be really a big task. Like I mentioned in my presentation, multiple time points, and also maybe not just students, also include teachers' views and also from other stakeholders. And I think my thinking for schools would be, the first question is really, what's the purpose of your well-being assessment plan? Recently, I gave a consultation on the similar topic. So I think there could be different purpose. For example, one focus could be on, say, the summative, like give a snapshot about students' well-being status, especially under COVID or the post-COVID they have experienced different issues related to their well-being. So what's really the status of students' well-being and also teachers' well-being. And another focus could be on the formative side. So our school gonna using the assessment data for identifying problems and also providing diagnostic information. So I think the purpose of the assessment really really connects to the methodology, how we could better design assessment, what's the focus. And also, I think this is a really big topic. It's not just about assessment, but also about like how the well-being program will be delivered, and also like teachers' literacy level and all other related issues. So it's not a simple task, but I'm really glad many schools, for example, in taking the Hong Kong example, what we've seen is actually many schools, they proactively want to do something related to well-being program or well-being assessment. So it's kind of not just top-down, but like a bottom-up or combination top-down, bottom-up approach. And yeah, I think this is a good timing. And as I also mentioned in my slides, well-being really matters than ever. So me as a researcher, also as educator, also looking forward to more examples and cases about how school implement well-being education, also assess well-being.
Thank you very much.